Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by...
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We are all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
Okay, so hi, welcome. So today we are talking about Midsommar. It's one of my favorite movies, and it's been requested I think once a month since it came out. I guess
Absolutely.
2 years ago now.
Yeah.
And so we did an Instagram live about it, like I think when quarantine started, like last spring. And so we're finally talking about it in full today. So we are also joined with some guests. We're here with Freudian Sips, another podcast who does psychology with Bonnie and Anna. And so I'll have them introduce themselves briefly.
Hello.
Hi, guys.
Hi, I'm Anna.
And I'm Bonnie.
And we are indeed from Freudian Sips. We're a podcast that's also about psychology. We like to have some wine and talk about weird brain stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of all we are.
Strange mother and daughter therapy thing.
Yeah.
We are licensed clinicians.
Yeah.
Therapists.
Yeah. We're supposed to be doing this.
We're supposed to be professionals.
People are letting us do
this. We do this for self-care. We do our podcast for self-care.
Lovely.
And we're thrilled to join you today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for showing up and doing this with us. And Ben is actually out of town for the holiday, so he won't be joining us. But it does feel appropriate that 4 women are talking about this movie.
It does.
Yes.
Midsommar.
Yes.
No boys allowed.
Sorry, Ben.
No boys
Sorry,
allowed.
Ben. Right. We kicked the boys out.
Mm-hmm. So Midsommar is about a young woman named Dani who is in a relationship with a guy that we'll talk about later, Christian. And in the very beginning of the movie, her sister, they mentioned has bipolar disorder, actually does a murder-suicide. She kills herself and murders their 2 parents in their home with a gas leak. And that's how the movie starts. So it starts pretty brutal. And then what happens is several months later, her horrible boyfriend takes her with him on a trip to Sweden with one of their friends. They realize that this place in Sweden that their friend Pele lives is actually, he calls it a commune. It is a cult. And over the course of the movie, she slowly gets indoctrinated into this cult while the friends that came along die one by one. So it is a horror movie. Some people think it's a really feministic movie. But today we're going to break down the characters of Dani. We're going to talk about trauma, grief, panic disorder, and also how being in a family with a family member who has a significant mental health diagnosis can impact your role relationally. We're also going to talk about Christian, her boyfriend, and gaslighting, narcissism, kind of the psychology of being a nice, quote unquote, nice guy. And then we're going to talk about the cult of psychology before we move into treatments and final thoughts. So yeah, we can jump right into Dani. I think trauma obviously is a topic that we'll bring into this episode.
Trauma, big neon flashing sign above Dani.
Yes.
Trauma.
Yes. I know we talk about trauma a lot on this podcast, guys, and we try to avoid it as much as we can. But this one, I mean, it starts with a huge trauma, the death of her parents and her sister, her whole family, basically.
Yeah, her whole family of origin.
Yeah.
So what do we see that is a direct impact of this trauma?
I mean, I think the thing that we see the most is the panic episodes that we see her like having throughout the film. And we were kind of led to believe early on when she is trying to get a hold of her sister, she is shown taking Ativan, which is for stress, for anxiety. So we know that she is already dealing with something like that. But we see her, like, there is one point in the movie where she is like taking mushrooms for the first time, and someone just says family, like the word family. Another person in the group says, "You guys are my family," and boom, immediately she is like spiraling.
She is triggered. Yeah,
totally triggered, and she has to like leave. She removes herself, which is another common thing that she does. She removes herself when she starts to feel like really strong emotion. So, I mean, I think that those are kind of the things that we see most from her, or this panic, but also when that panic starts to hit, she detaches, she isolates herself. And that also goes in with the Christian stuff too, because he isolates her as well.
Oh, yeah. So just very briefly, panic disorder is an anxiety disorder characterized by reoccurring unexpected panic attacks. Panic attacks are sudden periods of intense fear that may include palpitations, sweating, shaking, shortness of breath, numbness, or a feeling that something terrible is going to happen. And also, panic attacks can be a bit circular. Having a worry about having a panic attack can cause you a panic attack, which can sometimes be a criteria of panic attacks, which sucks because it's like a snake
Does suck.
tail.
Does suck.
It's like once it starts, it's like rolling down a hill.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's good to point out like that she was definitely prescribed Ativan, which is a medication for anxiety that I think a lot of people use. Correct me if I'm wrong, like PRN, like as needed. Like
I think
when you're
yes.
experiencing panic, sometimes people will take Ativan as an immediate way to calm down.
Right.
And so my assumption is, we don't know a lot about Dani before this movie, but my assumption is that she might have already been having panic attacks before this situation, before the movie starts, before the trauma, if she's having that prescribed to her. So that's pretty, I don't want to say if it's an intense medication, but it is prescribed to kind of take you out of intense anxiety.
Well, and I mean, we say the word trauma, and I mean, obviously the thing that happens at the beginning of the movie is a big T trauma, but this is a girl who has clearly been traumatized just by her family of origin,
right?
Just dealing with a bipolar sister. I mean, she's already got trauma.
Yes, they mentioned that her sister has bipolar disorder, and it sounds like the way Christian talks about the sister, and even kind of like the friend, and the way that she reacts to these emails is that my assumption is the sister has a history of being unpredictable and maybe a history of doing big things and scary things and uncontrollable things, which would cause. That's like, you're right. That is small T. Like you could argue small T traumas, or they could be big T traumas depending on what they actually like.
This is probably isn't the first big T trauma she's experienced. Just probably the biggest T T that there is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and just the constant worry of what is my sister going to do next?
Yeah.
And will she make it through? And is it gonna, how is it going to affect the rest of my life or the rest of my parents' life? I mean, at this point, not being at home and being at school, she could be very just worried about her parents. And if her sister's going to experience any kind of intense episode where she acts out in some way. I mean, I think, and my guess would be, and again, we don't know this for sure, but that Dani this is the first time she's lived away from home. That's the other piece that I have been kind of thinking about in terms of her seemingly to be maybe like 20, 21. She doesn't seem like she's a lot older than that.
I think her 27th birthday is on the Midsommar Festival. I think that's
27.
I think that's
really wow.
27. Holy shit.
Yeah.
What I was thinking.
I don't even think Florence Pugh is that old. Not that she couldn't be younger than her character.
In my deep dive about this, she was like 23 or 24 when the movie was made, and she was like upcast because it was 27. So
I know they're all in grad school.
And that's what I was going to ask.
Oh, that's right. That's right. You're right. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely not. It may not be her first time living away from home. Then I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that I thought was interesting was that she's a student of psychology.
Yeah,
that she was going into psych. Yeah, they kind of keep going back to that. But I was thinking too, early on that perhaps because, like you guys have already said, we have to make a lot of assumptions about these characters and what they've already been through. And I mean, it's like that in all movies, but in this, it just seems really thick. And the fact that when she does have those panic episodes, she kind of does the same thing where she separates herself and we see her going into bathrooms. Mm-hmm. That's kind of like a theme. She escapes to the bathroom to have to self-talk to calm herself down. And she does a lot of that self-talk too. So then you kind of are led to think, well, perhaps, hopefully, that she has had some therapy up to that point that maybe helped her get that, or did she learn that in school?
Christian mentions that she has, like, at one point
she has a therapist.
Yeah, their friend is like, she needs a therapist or something, and he's like, she has a therapist.
Oh, that's right.
Okay, yeah. Oh, Mark. We won't even talk about Mark, but he can kick rocks. He's such a douche. I think I wrote he's an incel in my notes.
Yeah, same. I wrote the same thing.
Yeah, just a typical cringy American, just about as stereotypically embarrassingly American.
Cool, the fool archetype in any horror movie is definitely that.
Yeah. But I go ahead.
And I think again with Dani, that her isolating herself, my guess is that she used the bathroom as a kid because that's the only place her family wouldn't come into. And I'm sure that she tried to be like a wallflower at home. Yeah. I would be surprised if that wasn't a part of what her learned behavior about, I'm not, my sister has enough emotion for everyone. I'm not allowed to show any, and I don't want to be a problem for anybody else. I don't want to create any issues. So I also feel like the bathroom, it may not be something that's worked out with the therapist, but more is something that she has always been a place where she feels like she can be calm. And at the same time, she's always consistently suppressing the emotion that she's having. She won't let herself get that upset, which is why I think that moment in the movie where that group empathy piece,
where they draw it out of her.
Exactly. And because they're validating her, they're validating the fact that she feels this way, and they're matching it, which means she's not silly or crazy or out of control. She is, everyone else can feel this too. Then I'm finally allowed to let some of this out. And again, my guess is that growing up in that family of origin, that she suppressed her emotion because that was a survival technique that she had to use.
I'm in a similar vein to what you're speaking, Hannah. In the sense that when you grow up with a family where one of the family members needs a lot of attention, and that I don't mean in a negative way, I just mean they have more needs, and if it's physical stuff, mental stuff, and my assumption is that based on what we've already talked about, that her sister had a lot of needs and had a lot of feelings, and so Dani's role in the family, how can I help the family? I have to be quiet. I have to be peaceful. I have to be I have to be someone who doesn't need anything because my parents are already going through enough. And so I feel like she's kind of taken on a role of not necessarily like peacekeeper, but that keeps everything calm, and I'm not going to be a problem, which is something I've worked with, like teenagers I work with, is they have such a hard time sometimes telling their parents how much they're suffering, how much they're struggling, because I'm supposed to be the one that's okay. I
don't want to put more on their plate.
Yes. And so I think you really see that when she calls her friend. Well, when she calls Christian the very first time in this movie, and she's clearly crying and she's very upset, but she doesn't tell him right away. Instead, she just acts like everything's fine when she's talking to him. And then in a roundabout way, tries to ask for what she needs by saying, hey, are we hanging out later? Instead of saying, hey, I'm really scared. Can I talk to you, or can you come over and be with me? And then even though she's barely emotional with him in that moment, she still calls her friend and is panicking that she is being too emotional with him and pushing away. And this is someone she's been dating for probably 3 years at this point. This isn't a new relationship where she's like, we've only been dating for 2 months and I'm worried I'm too messy for this guy who barely knows me. Like, this is someone who's been her partner, quote unquote, for multiple years.
Right. But we know that it's been disengaged for maybe half of that, because like his friends later, like, you've been wanting out of this for a year or whatever they say. So, I mean, she is getting these messages from him that he is detaching. And instead of saying he's detaching, she's saying, I'm doing something to make him detach.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that idea of being even kind of being somebody who has to please other people, or the idea that she is too much.
Yes.
And when we feel like we're too much, then we automatically go to that place. And also in some ways, is also can be indicative of a relationship where there is some emotional abuse as well. This idea that, I don't want him to get mad at me. Well, what happens when he gets mad? Like, what about that is scary, or feels like you have to, and also feels like you have control of his emotions.
Well,
like,
and I think for
right?
her, that main fear is the abandonment thing.
Oh
Right.
yeah. Oh
So he's
yeah.
gonna leave.
Yeah, we see that later in like, I mean, very viscerally, we see it in like the dream when they're all like driving away and leaving her behind. So I think that's like the most visual we get. But even there's that scene, and this kind of goes back to the emotional abuse, question mark, is that a part of their relationship where there's a scene where they're having this, it's not even a fight, a discussion after they come back from the party, and she finds out he's going to Sweden. And she's like, why didn't you tell me? And he kind of starts with like, I did tell you. And then when she kind of calls him on that, he changes his story. And then when she kind of calls him on that, he's like, I'm just going to go. And she's like, no. I was just talking. I'm just asking. Please stay here. Let's talk about this. And immediately flips to this like, it's okay. Everything's fine. I'm not mad. Let's just talk.
And she apologizes to him.
Right.
A lot.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll talk about that fight more with Christian, but I think that's kind of a perfect example of someone like Dani and someone like Christian, in that he also sort of indoctrinated her into being in this role with him. But I also wonder because we don't know how their whole relationship, like if it was always some version of this or if it became a version of this. And so if we're just going to speculate that it's always been like this, then Dani, it makes sense if she is kind of like the peacekeeper or the one without any needs at home. Like this is kind of replicating maybe even her relationship with her sister. Like, it's, I'm sorry, like, let's just calm down, like not a big deal, of trying to just bring this situation down instead of her saying, fuck you, dude. You didn't tell me about this trip. Now you're trying to say that I didn't know about it. You know what? You know what? You can leave. You can go leave and you can go fucking sit on it. Like go fuck yourself.
Her feelings, she feels like her feelings are never okay, even when they're very valid. Because it's entirely understandable for her in that moment to be like, hey, you didn't tell me and I'm pissed. Like, that's a very easy thing to tell me. But instead, that totally gets erased because that's going to be responded badly to. So she totally pulls it back. Like, and that goes within the whole film, where she is just until kind of near the end, the climax, where there is this explosion of emotion where she's pulling it back always. Whenever we see her even going off on her own for these panic episodes, she's pulling it in.
Yeah. She's telling herself, I'm okay. It's all right. Everything's all right.
Yeah. Oof, that was rough. When when you are in that state, you should never take hallucinogenics because you're going to trip horribly. Like there's no way on earth you are going to have a good time. Because it brings up all your stuff. And I think that is the moment too. I think that's what you're mentioning. Someone brought up family. I think Pele brings up family, which triggers his parents dying, which triggers her panic attack in their apartment. And then when she's tripping, someone talks about family, and that's when she has the panic attack and goes into that outhouse. And so, yeah, I think, even like, well, going back to that of like what her relationship was within her family of origin, I wonder if like how she doesn't think it's a big deal that her birthday is kind of forgotten about. I wonder if that ever happened growing up, because her sister just needed a lot. Maybe not, this could be totally something different. But it does kind of, why does she accept all these behaviors? Like, is this new to her relationship with Christian, or is this something that's always been going on for her since she was little? Yeah. Like not being important, like not being the one who's thought of, and not in like a purposely mean way, but just in a incidental way.
And you kind of mentioned that with like, you've worked with kids on that. I know I've worked with a lot of kids on that who like, their parents aren't attending to them, but it's not malicious. It's not intentional. It's just your parents aren't good at this either. Like your parents have their own stuff and they're not able to meet the needs that you have. And that's his fault. It just sucks.
Yeah.
And we try to get through it.
Especially if, given how I'm becoming a little redundant, but given how her sister leaves this earth, like how she dies, it makes me wonder like how much stuff like that's happened before too, like attempts or really intentional like hospitalizations, because she's so organized, her plan when she finally dies.
Yeah, it's a very elaborate plan.
That is indicative of like maybe rumination and planning and something that's maybe been a while coming. Because if it was spontaneous, my assumption would be it wouldn't be as organized, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, there were props. There was duct tape. There were hoses. There's a lot. There's a lot.
Planning.
There's
Definitely planning.
It definitely, I think, and I don't know if it's just because that's how they wanted to open the movie with something like that, but that somebody, even me and Brittany were kind of talking about this. We watched it together last night again, and we were talking about how someone who is experiencing a psychotic episode would be more disorganized. We were talking, not always, I'm not saying that, because as we know, mental health is struggles can be present differently and be different for every single person. And at the same time that we've worked with people who experience psychotic symptoms on a regular basis. And the organization that's shown in what she did seems so off in terms of what someone would do with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Just doesn't quite match the level of planning that would have to go in for her to do something like that.
Yeah, I do think that's just sort of a movie magic sort of thing.
I think it's like they dropped that bipolar in there just because it's recognizable.
Ooh,
people,
scary, crazy word.
Yeah, people say, that's a word I know is mental illness, and
And
right,
once
but it
again,
is a pretty unfair thing.
Yeah, perpetuating the idea that many of these movies do, which is that people with mental health diagnoses are dangerous and they will do dangerous things.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is something we always talk about, and about how it's fucking bullshit and unfair to continuously show this representation when people who have significant mental health struggles are much more likely to be victims than they are to do things like this, that they are not inherently violent because of what they're experiencing. And Hollywood, as we know, that's their favorite card to play.
Yeah. It's easy. It's
easy for them. It's
easy for them.
easy for them to play everything off like that.
Yeah.
I was trying to think. There's one other thing I wanted to talk to about Dani.
Well, and I would say, kind of bringing it back to what we talked about with her suppressing her emotions in those moments, it makes me think of when I talk about being in your emotion mind and your logic mind, and how I explain it. And the concept in dialectical behavioral therapy is wise mind, which is how can you honor both your emotion mind, which is like your thoughts, your feelings, your symptoms, your desires, and your logic mind, which is like your shoulds. Like, I should go to school. Like all the things you need to do. Like I have to follow laws and manners and blah, blah, blah. And I think how I'll talk about it is you can't be only in one part of your mind. Like you can't be so in your emotion mind that everyone else needs to just deal with it. Like I can't go to school because I'm so upset. I can't not yell at you because I'm so mad. Yeah. And I think the reverse of it, which is Dani, is when you're so in your logic mind that you are just suppressing, like, I have to be okay. I have to go to school. I have to be a good girlfriend, that I can't do my emotion mind. But the problem is one of those things is going to pop. Either if you're so in your emotion mind, your life's going to kind of fall apart. And if you're so in your logic mind, you are going to start imploding or exploding.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is
one of the things that we talked about, though, about Dani was that even though she was the one with all the trauma and the panic and everything, that she would have these real clear moments where everybody else to be ignoring, what was happening, like with the friends disappearing and stuff. And she
would seem Connie, and everyone else is like, no,
whatever. She was the one who kind of would all of a sudden have this real clarity, just a moment, and then it would get swept up with the whole everybody else, stuff.
Yeah. And that's because not only was she suppressing those emotions, like she was taught to second guess that, but everyone else was reinforcing that, when she comes up to Christian and starts saying, like, I can't even remember what part of the movie she was like, what was happening. Someone had disappeared because that kept happening. But she was like, this is going on. And he was trying to like talk to someone else.
He left. She was talking about the girl's boyfriend had left.
Yeah.
The girl's boyfriend left. And she was. And
he's like, that's weird. And he like grabbed her hand and like said something to her very dismissively and then turned back to his conversation. And there's just this like zoom in shot of her staring at him, and it kind of reflected all of us. Like, what?
Yeah, I mean, part of trauma is being hypervigilant.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. And so that can be I don't want to say a positive trait, but maybe I would say like in situations like this, like when you're inside of a horror movie, or maybe when you're a detective or something,
hypervigilance
can be a helpful trait because you're assessing the situation at all times. And so, and I think the boyfriend thing, when you brought up the abandonment thing, she does get really stuck on the boyfriend, Connie, and the boyfriend thing and him leaving without her. And I wonder if that's because it triggered her kind of abandonment stuff.
Yeah.
Well, we loved the line when she was sitting at the table and she said, kind of almost under her breath, that's like something you would do, or I could see you doing that, or whatever.
I was like, what? Nothing.
Yeah. She's like, never mind.
Yeah.
And he can't
really honest
get over that.
Yeah.
Well, and also, so as we were watching the movie, I was trying to pay attention to when he is making good eye contact with her, or actually really. So when she says that to him, he looks right in her eyes and says, "What?" Like someone who is abusive would only hone in on when you're pushing back against what they believe to be true about themselves.
Oh, that's good.
But he doesn't really look her in the eyes or even physically address her body. Like it's like, I mean, he's completely detached. And again, we don't know if that's, the way the relationship has always been, or if it has just gotten there. But to be perfectly honest, it seems like something that's so natural to him that it seems like it might have always been that way in terms of any of his physical, his nonverbals are really all about him.
Yeah. And we know that that's not just with Dani. He is a bad communicator, full stop. I mean, he does not interact well with his friends. He doesn't interact well with Dani, obviously. He's very, very himself first. I mean, I think that is it's not just in the relationship. It's a pattern with him.
Yeah. Before we get to Christian, I also wanted to bring up, like, just for an example of the panic disorder, which looks different. But I don't think what people think about panic disorder is when the two older people jump off of the cliff to do sort of like cult sanctioned euthanasia or whatever.
Just cult things. Just cult things.
Cult things. That numbness comes into play, and she is just kind of like shut down. You can see her starting to panic. It's that thing when you're worried something bad's going to happen, which is also the hypervigilance too, which can feel sort of like a psychic superpower sometimes, which is she knows before anybody else in the friend group, like something bad's about to happen, because her breath starts getting short of breath, like right before they do it. And then she, like, you can, the way they do the music, it like, she becomes totally like attached and numb from the situation.
Everything else. Yeah. There's that shot where she is alone in the frame and everything else around her is blurred, like the background's blurred. And we know that she was standing with her friends, but all of a sudden she's like alone in frame. And I even mentioned to Mom, like, that is such an interesting visual representation of, like, I mean, I think it is a panic moment, but I think it's dissociation. I mean, I think she's like, the shock is leaving, like, making her leave her body. And I think that during that whole thing, she is very detached. She's very like she's dissociating. Right, I think that's what's happening until she leave and she goes somewhere else to freak out a little bit.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think I leaned over and said to her, I was like, yeah, she's dissociating. Like she is standing here. She's not touching anyone. And she is somewhere else. Yeah. Which based on the big T trauma she had experienced less than a year ago, I think it might have only been, it seemed like it had been 6 months, maybe.
Yeah.
I think at some point they say that. So 6 months where her sister completed suicide and also murdered her parents, and she sees these people commit suicide in front of her. I mean, if that isn't the next worst thing that could happen to you.
Yeah. Like Christian knew what that was going to be too.
Did he?
Josh did he?
No, Josh did.
Ellen knew.
He was trying to look it up.
Josh knew. Because remember, Josh did that little like, I'm not going to tell you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Josh knew. He didn't fucking say anything. And Christian didn't have an idea. But you also notice, again, with the body language, he is all himself. We're not talking about him yet. We'll talk about that in a minute. Sorry, I forgot.
But it's okay. But with Dani, I think we've kind of covered all she has clear, I don't think we need to go into more detail about like proving that she has like panic disorder. She clearly panic disorder, but that has also been exacerbated by maybe learned behaviors because of her family. Different social environment in which she's around all these guys who don't affirm her. And that's why like the turn in the movie for her and how she gets indoctrinated into this cult is that they are very present with her. They are emotionally with her. They touch her. Pele, they're all validating her feelings like that. Like you're referencing Hannah, when the big scene when she's starting to panic, when she sees Christian having sex with that woman, and they're in the sleeping barn together, all the women, and they're just, which is something you can do in therapy, which is make someone stay present. Like, we're not going to shut this down. You and I are going to ride out this feeling together. And that moment, I remember when I saw it in theaters the first time, it could be construed as really silly. Like, it's definitely a moment where people in a theater could start laughing. And everyone was like dead silent. Like, you could hear a pin drop. Everyone was like in this moment in the theater of like, I think feeling how powerful it was to watch her finally not only get to be with other people while she's feeling these deep feelings she's had alone the whole movie, but to be so validated and connected. I think she's so isolated this whole movie. And so that moment
is what gets her. And the difference is it's a very fine line with like that therapeutic empathy. Because like in therapy, if we're doing it, if we're saying, hey, we're going to stay in this, I'm with you, it's fine. Like, but that's where, that's where our job is. We're staying with you, but this is your feeling. We're going to get you through this. This is your feeling. We're going to feel it together. It's okay. But in the movie, the connectedness this is all of our feelings. It's that word that I can't say when it comes to cults, Mom, de-individuation.
That's it.
Is that it?
De-individuation.
De-individuation. De-individuation.
Can't say that three
I'm not even
times.
going to try. I'm not even going to try. So,
but it's like she is finally having this catharsis of feeling those feelings, but it's being assimilated into the cult in the same breath. Breath.
Yes.
Breath is a big.
But it's interesting you bring that up too, because all the times that Pele also tries to do that, he's connecting it to his experience. When my parents died, no, we are the same. I am like you. You are like me.
Yes.
And so though like the purpose could very easily be positive, I think that's what's so good about this movie is that it seems it on paper could be very positive experiences, but the way in the whole context of this movie, it's clearly, like you were saying, trying to get her out of the individual and into the collective.
absolutely.
And even it's interesting the difference in how Pele interacts with her versus Christian and everyone else. Like Hannah, when you were talking earlier about how Christian never makes eye contact with her, Pele, whenever he is talking to her, is like right there, looking her right in the eyes, attending to her very, very closely. And there was even the moment like when she came into the apartment and she was talking to the other friends, like she kind of engages Pele and they're talking, and Josh, like the other friend, just like stands up and walks away. Like he doesn't even try to get in this conversation with her, even though it's a thing that he's also going to, like the Midsommar Festival. So he just like walks away. Everyone just disengages from her except for Pele.
Exactly.
So in like a different movie, he might be like the romantic lead that comes in and like saves her. But in this movie, not so much.
Yeah, there is that part when he kisses her. I can't remember now what had happened. He was congratulating her or whatever.
She won. She became the May Queen.
Yeah, and he kissed her, and that seemed kind of like a romantic kiss.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But then,
And then things went downhill.
And then, everything went south.
And then it got worse. Yeah.
Well, and I think that is something that I noticed too, is that just his physical response to her all the time, the way that he draws her a picture for her birthday, and
that's very intimate.
And
that's a very intimate.
Absolutely, and he's not always touching her, but like Like he holds her hand after when they're talking about that. He puts his hand on her shoulder, I think, at some point.
Well, he's attentive to her.
Yeah, absolutely.
His body language.
And maybe unlike, and again, we don't know enough about her, but maybe the most anybody has ever been. I mean, her parents could have easily, in some ways, been burnt out. Dealing with the significant struggle that their other daughter had, and not have the capacity really to give her the emotionality that she needed or the validation that she needed. So having anybody do that, it really is a perfect way to suck her into the cult. I mean, it really is.
Well, and even if she wasn't getting that in her family of origin, I mean, we know she's been in a 3-year-long relationship where she's not getting that. She's probably been away from home for a little while just because she's like in grad school in a way. So, I mean, I think that she is just that. And again, it goes back to that disconnection thing. I mean, she is so isolated, just so isolated.
And also, she doesn't have, I mean, she talks to that one friend on the phone, but we don't really see any, she's, I mean, by the nature of the plot of the movie, so I don't know if this is really true, but we only see her with her boyfriend's friends. So there's one level of removal there. And also his friends, besides Pele, besides being in a cult, but Pele sucks ass. They never, I remember writing down, Pele is the only person who ever tells her he's sorry. He's the only person who checks in with her about her grief and asks how she is. The other guys in the group either talk about how annoying she is, or they're just, the nicest thing that they do is Josh gives her sleeping pills. Right. When she asks. And that's it.
Yeah. And that's the only time they interact. Everyone's very caught up in their own stuff.
Yeah. And these men aren't teenagers. They're grown men who are so immature in the sense of your girlfriend's a drag, man. Mark is so immature.
Yeah.
And
think of all the other girls you could be having sex with right now.
He's probably in love with Christian.
Probably.
Oh,
honestly.
There's a deep cut.
That would make sense.
But so all this, which is what we do in life, is we re-traumatize ourselves, or we find people that fit into the schema of our view of life. And so finding someone who Christian, and then being part of his friend group that also perpetuates this, because it's not challenging her either, though she's obviously distressed and struggling. You can see how much harder it feels for her in the moment to be validated and to be in her emotion mind. Pele is pretty gentle in his approach in that first scene, and she immediately freaks and has to go away.
Well, and I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of, again, her not maybe ever getting that. And so the first sign of getting that is this is something I don't know how to deal with.
It's overwhelming. Yeah,
exactly. Well, it's overwhelming. It's now also because a lot of times when you are in a family of origin where you have to take care of yourself all of the time, you don't expect anyone else to even be interested in doing that or to be validating in any way. So when it happens, and part of having a panic disorder is that you think that you know what's going to happen, right? So he says this to her and looks her in the eyes and says, I'm so sorry. And it's and she's like, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what to do with that. I got to get the fuck out of here. Cause no one's ever said that to me. And I'm sure her friends have, I'm not saying that her friends haven't done that, but the look of panic on her face when she has to go into that room is
have the shift in her.
Yeah, exactly. I thought I knew what to expect. Well, because also when you, like Brittany was saying, you seek out relationships that are the same as the relationships you had in your family. So she's pretty comfortable, as comfortable as someone can be, in terms of not getting her needs met by anyone else. Right. That's her expectation is that people aren't gonna care or be connected or want to be connected to me. So she's not even looking for it. So for Pele to come straight for her, even though, again, he was very gentle and kind, that would just be I don't know what this is. I don't know what this is.
I'm sure we've all experienced as therapists when you have someone in therapy, you might be like new to therapy, or when you work with younger clients, sometimes they don't feel like they made the decision to go to therapy. And then you ask a question that they're not expecting. And there's this look like, how dare you do this to me? Like, make me vulnerable.
Yeah.
Like, this is awful. Therapy is awful. You're making me feel worse.
I apologize to people for cracking them like an egg. Because it just seems to happen in therapy, and they're always like, oh, this isn't fun for me. It's like, well, it's not supposed to be fun, bud. Sorry.
Yeah. So is there anything else we want to touch upon with Dani before we take a break and talk about Christian?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't have anything else.
Well, we're going to keep talking about it to talk about Christian. So very quickly, we're going to take a break. We'll be back. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is the break time, Ben. Put the break in here, bro. Okay. All right. Counting back down. 5, 4, 3, 2. I have bad allergies. 1. So now we're going to finally rip into Christian. The true villain of this movie. Well, I don't know if that's true. But
I mean, it feels true. It fucking feels true.
Well, when the director who also wrote this movie, Ari Aster, when people were like, oh my God, this movie, bro, like, what the fuck? He was like, it's just a movie about like a bad relationship I just got broken up with. And so I wrote this movie. And so to him, I think the point of this movie is their relationship. And I think it is a masterful demonstration or portrayal of very more subtle gaslighting and emotional abuse that I think I wouldn't be surprised if people listening would argue with us about if this is quote unquote abuse.
Right. Yeah, because it's that subtle.
Mm-hmm. So what did you see in this movie that, well, one brought up the term gaslighting, and I guess we could describe that a little bit. I think it's getting more pop culture-y, the term gaslighting. And
Very
people
much.
definitely the teenage shows I work with like to throw it around, and I'm like, I don't know about this because they they weaponize it a little too much. But gaslighting is basically, I'm going to just give my own paraphrased version of it, is when someone makes you feel like you are kind of crazy for what you're thinking. They're trying to make you distrust yourself, make you feel like what you're saying isn't true. It's tricking you. It's kind of like sedating you like gas. Like it's trying to make you feel like you are the crazy one.
A little bit.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. It has a lot to do with distorting the reality that you're sitting in so that they always feel not at ease.
Mm-hmm. And it can be kind of, when we see that a lot in this movie, Christian is constantly undermining Dani's feelings and also making her feel like she's being dramatic, which is awful because, as we've just talked about, she works hard constantly to not be dramatic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we see that in the very first, phone call to him where she's like, I just got this really scary email, and I'm really worried about what my sister is doing. And he's like, she does this all the time. It's fine. Like,
what I think is even more gross about him is that he brings it up. He says, hey, how's this stuff going with your sister? She answers his question, and then he immediately starts like minimizing her and undermining her.
Right.
It's like, why did you fucking ask that?
Why did you bring it up in the first place, dude?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and then there's the whole, going back to the conversation about when after she finds out he's going to Sweden, that's like, I think if I were to point at any conversation and say that is gaslighting, that's the one I would point to. And just I did tell you, no, you didn't. Oh, well, I mentioned it. I mentioned wanting to go or something. He just keeps like trying to restructure the reality so he is right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's almost similar to like grooming someone, like slowly making them like changing the story enough every time you say it that they're not even realizing what's happening until it's happening. Like, and changing it so quickly. And I think what he does in that fight after the party is, one, he's constantly changing the narrative, so she can't really keep up. 2, and also when you're constantly changing the narrative, it's hard to dispute it because you're not basing it on concrete facts. And also when you unless you are also not healthy, you're not like keeping receipts of every conversation you had with your significant other. Like, well, actually at 12:02 last Thursday, you did say I'm going to Sweden with my friends. It's like, no, like you don't behave that way as human beings.
And yet the amount of couples that sit in my office in couples therapy and try to say, that's not what I said. I said this. No, you said this. And I said this. No, you said this. And I'm like, hey guys, this doesn't matter. Hey.
Yes.
I usually say something like, okay, well, we're going to stop talking about that because it doesn't matter. You both feel like shit right now, right? Yeah.
Right.
Then this doesn't fucking matter. It doesn't matter who said what. It matters that you can, it's just.
Well, because it's the concept of, do you want to win this fight or do you want to feel better and come to a resolution as a couple?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, because most people have the, if I win it, I will feel better. But that's not true.
Then someone else is losing.
Yeah.
And I think what he also does in that argument is he plays a victim. He goes, well, now I feel like I'm being attacked. Like he starts to play the victim card. He also, I feel like I'm looking for a word or phrase when I'll just leave.
I'll just
abandoning her, like probably triggering her abandonment fear.
But that's like he's manipulating her with that, though, because he knows that'll flip her out.
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, because how would it not flip her out?
Exactly.
Right. Like, so he knows what to say to get her to acquiesce to him.
Right.
Whether or not he has, I mean, I feel like he absolutely has awareness of that, but maybe he doesn't. But I really feel like he does. He's just a fucking but I think even that idea of playing everything like, well, of playing the victim. He just plays he plays the victim in every role possible and is only ever looking out for himself.
There was in that conversation after the party, he at one point he says, "I'm sorry," but he says it, "I'm sorry."
I'm sorry. Mark on the end. I wrote that down
because we were watching with closed captioning, and I said, "I know it was a question because there was a question mark."
The subtitle told me it was a question,
and that would have been the point in the fight where I would have thrown something at his head. Yeah, sorry, you're sorry, and then that's what the fight would be. But and I think what is interesting about this is like he never raises his voice, she never raises her voice. Like he never comes like he's never doing the things that I think we're taught are what an abusive person does. Like he's never calling her names. He's never attacking her really.
Right. He's never calling her names. He's never physically hurting her, which is what I feel like some people really only think abuse is physical abuse. And they have no awareness of the destructiveness of emotional abuse. I mean, trying to altering someone's reality is so damaging in terms of their personhood, just in general. So, and I think you're right, Brittany. I think people, expect, well, he didn't hit her. Like, he's like, right. Yeah. He didn't hit her because he didn't have to.
He wasn't even trying to fight with her. He tried to leave.
Exactly. Like she's burrowing in the fucking corner already, hiding herself because of what this person is doing to her. So I'm pretty sure, so I do think that, and that scene is such a perfect example of someone who thinks that they're a good person. Like he thinks that he's a nice guy. 100%.
Yeah, he truly does believe he's in the right.
Oh yeah. And will create whatever story he needs to make sure that that's true, whether that involves manipulating her, manipulating his friends, and just in general, not taking responsibility for anything. Like how the whole thing, the way that he sets up her coming to Sweden with them is just so insensitive and
to the point
mean.
Of absurdity when he's telling his friends like, well, she's not going to go. I offered her to go. She's not going to go. She said she's going to go, but she's not going to go. She's not going to go. And they're all just looking at him like, what are you talking about, man?
Yeah,
because it is. It's he does this like talking until he's right thing.
Right. And by the way, I told her that it was you guys' idea to invite you.
So act like
so I'm twisting my communication with everybody.
Well, he puts everyone in a horrible position where someone else is going to have to be the asshole to finally get to the other side of this bullshit. I mean, he's very masterful at staying, because it is hard to yell at somebody or to fight with somebody who doesn't pull the full first punch in that very dynamic way, because you then have to be the disruptor. And if you don't have the confidence to be the disruptor, which Dani definitely doesn't have, it just continues this cycle of taking it on the chin and thinking maybe I'm the one that's wrong. And I mean, which is what happens in that fight after the party, which you keep talking about because it's such a good example. She ends up apologizing to him. It's so infuriating. And then she tries to make small talk to keep the peace. That's a very clear indicator of like an abusive cycle of then she's trying to make everything okay and like please him in that moment by changing the subject and getting out of the argument.
Well, and then you have to pretend that you're interested in what they're doing in order to make them feel good, because that's what you're trying to do.
I mean, I think the thing we're dancing around, but not really, is that we're not going to diagnose him with anything, but I think he shows signs of narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder. We don't know enough about him. Christian only exists in the bubble of this movie. Like, we don't know anything about him outside of his relationship with Dani and what we see on the screen. So we don't know his parents. We don't know what he was like before Dani. We don't know what he was like, all this kind of. He does have like here's a clip from an article from the Mayo Clinic about narcissistic personality disorder. Socially, the person with NPD usually exhibits a fragile ego, which I think we see with him, intolerance of criticism, and a tendency to belittle other people in order to validate their own superiority. I think, and where this ties in with the nice guy mentality is, I think I'm a nice person. I identify as a quote unquote nice guy. And so when anyone else pokes at that identity, I use these tactics to undermine them so I can go back to the comfort, my little bubble of who I think I am, which is the fragile ego of can't.
And I think one part of the nice guy identity is I'm a nice guy, so I deserve for everything to go my way. Like I'm a nice guy, so I deserve to have this thesis that someone else was working on for years. I'm a nice guy because I stayed with my girlfriend because she's, in a fragile mental state. So everyone should look at me like I'm a nice guy because I did the right thing.
And if she ever accused him of being a piece of shit or broke up with him, he would be eaten out on the I stayed with her after her parents died for the rest of his life. That would be the story he'd be telling everybody.
Yep.
How dare she break up with me after I did that for her? I barely did anything. That whole 6 months, I was just taking care of her, and I'd put oh God, I don't even want to think about the story.
Yeah, in reality, he was isolating her just at every turn. Like there's the scene right after kind of the time cut, I guess, like right before the party. She's like laying there and he comes in and she's like, well, oh, where are you going? He's like, oh, I'm just going to go to this party for 45 minutes. She's the one that says, oh, I'll go with you. Like he was fully ready to just leave her lying in bed alone and go to a party by himself.
It's because he wants to contain all these parts of his identity, which is I want to do what I want to do while also not being the guy who broke up with the girl whose parents just died.
Right.
So I'm going to try to go to Sweden without telling her. I'm going to try to go to this party without telling her. But I'm not going to be so sneaky and secretive that you can accuse me of outright lying, even though he is doing that.
That's the problem with Christian. He's not smart enough to do what he's doing. What would he think was going to happen in 2 weeks when he went to Sweden? Was that when he was going to tell her? But he's just not quite smart enough to do this artfully.
Which I think is definitely a sign of how emotionally immature he is. Like, I think he's always just in this moment of satisfaction. Like, what do I want right now? I don't want to deal with Dani knowing about this trip and what that means.
Yeah.
I don't want to deal with my friends being mad at me.
Right. The part where he was like, well, I just decided today that I was going to go. And Dani was like, you have a ticket.
Yeah.
It's just very like, he's, yeah, I just keep saying he's not smart enough. That's my
It's amazing he's in grad school.
Well, he doesn't seem like he's doing a very good job in grad school. Like his friends do kind of call him out on like, you don't even have your thesis. And maybe if you weren't so wrapped up in your emotional drama, you would be able to focus on your studies more.
Yeah. And it also makes sense why then he has friends that validate him. Like, I'm sure the only reason why he has Mark around is because Mark feeds his ego. Mark probably thinks he's hot fucking shit. Like, that thinks that Christian's hot shit. And then Mark is like his little like devil on his shoulder that's like, he says she's abusing you, bro, in the very beginning because she needs you emotionally as her boyfriend. Like... So he has someone who's feeding.
It's not like he got into this relationship blind. I mean, we talked before about how she grew up in this traumatic family environment with a relative who has a mental illness, and he is clearly not understanding the stress that puts her under. But I mean, this didn't start after they got in a relationship. He went into this relationship knowing that she has this as part of her life.
And it's not. Oh, go ahead, Hannah.
Well, and at the very least, even if he didn't know that when they started dating, he sure as fuck knows by now. And he certainly knew within the first year, would be my guess, that he knew within the first year and decided to continue to be in the relationship.
Yeah. And I think it would also be different if this behavior was contained to his relationship with her. But like the thesis thing with Josh and how he subverts his thesis. I mean, I think it's douchey on both their parts that they go to their friend's cultural environment and then tries to profit off of it and then gawks at them all like as if this isn't Pele's like culture. That's very insensitive. And like the fact that he gets confronted. I think Josh is the only person in this movie that truly confronts him in the barn with the thesis thing, which then, of course, I'm sure throws Christian entirely because he can't handle criticism. And then when Josh goes missing and that book goes missing, he completely detaches.
Immediately throws him under the bus.
And he's like, I don't even know this guy. He's like one of your closest friends.
With him.
I don't know him.
I don't know that guy.
We don't associate with him.
Yeah.
It's like, motherfucker, you came here with him. What are you talking about?
I think you live with him.
Yeah.
The look on Dani's face in that scene is interesting because she's looking at him like, you are a piece of shit.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Those moments where Dani kind of looks at him the way we're all feeling toward him.
Yes, exactly.
When he's sitting on the ground and she's doing the maypole dance and she's having a really good time and she sees him and this look of disgust washes over her face, made me laugh.
Yeah, it was awesome.
She's like, you're like a buzzkill, bro. Like, get out of my line of sight. I'm trying to have a good time. Yeah.
Because it was right. It was right after he said the thing about, I don't know him. And she was looking at him with such disgust that the guy said, okay, well, you're going to go with the girls. And you have to go, Christian, you have to go over into the house of death or whatever. Go over to that house and you'll probably be killed over there. And Christian looks at her and is like, are you okay? But what he's really saying is, I don't think you should let me go over there alone. You know? Yeah. And her response was like, yeah, I'm fine. So like, go on to your death house. I'm going to go dance.
Yeah. And I think too, like this movie does a good job with him and how, because also part of narcissistic personality disorder is you have trouble displaying empathy or like grasping empathy. And he, I think a subtle ways this movie shows that is like when she wakes up after her bad trip, he doesn't touch her. Like he never does anything to try to like show her comfort.
Right.
That was one of the things Anna said when she was waking up from that trip. And he said, we found you 6 hours ago or whatever.
You're 6 hours ago.
Yeah. Anna said, and they like, her boyfriend looked at her laying on the ground and didn't even like put a blanket on her or hold her or something, you know. It was like, okay, sleep it off.
And he is very like flat affect, like the whole movie.
Yeah.
But like I like even, and they all kind of do this where they don't during the Atastupa ritual where they're jumping off the cliff. Mom was like, why isn't anyone freaking out? Like no one's freaking out appropriately here. And especially him, he kind of has this like shocked look, but it's very flat in terms of what you should be feeling.
His energy. He says something that kind of felt like, that was fucking crazy, right? To Dani afterwards. Like that was the vibe.
That was wild.
Like,
anyway, about our thesis.
Yeah, and it's like your girlfriend's parents just died and her sister just died by suicide less than a year ago, and you're just like reflecting upon how bonkers that was, but you're not trying to touch her, you're not being present with her. And also with like the mushroom thing too, when they all want to take mushrooms and she says, I don't really feel like it, and then he makes her feel guilty because she doesn't want to take mushrooms. It's like he should have been like, hey, if he'd had empathy in that moment, he would have said, you know what, we're not going to do them. You know, it's cool. We're going to be fine. Or at least saying like, you don't have to do them. I totally understand. And then as soon as she acquiesced, he's like, yeah.
What'd you say, Anna? I think we missed it.
That he could have still done them and it would have been fine. But instead he needed that control over her. He needed her to be doing the same thing they were doing.
Well, and also he wants to do the dance of, I'm a nice guy. Like, I'm the nice guy who's not going to do mushrooms because his girlfriend's not going to do mushrooms. But he doesn't really not want to do mushrooms. So it's like he has to do this dance all the time to keep the masquerade up that he's a good boyfriend. Like the fact that when he forgets her birthday, he tries to also do that cake shit. And like, it's just I don't think he's real cognizant of the fact that he's trying to convince himself all the time that he's a nice guy, because it's obviously not natural to him. And he is trying to, I think he believes he is a nice guy or has to believe it. And so I don't think he's obviously reckoned with who he truly is and what he's truly, I'm saying capable of. I don't mean that in like the malevolent sense, but just like what is natural to him.
Yeah.
And I think he's trying to be this person because he wants to be this person, but it's obviously not organic.
Yeah, I think that if we can be a little empathetic to Christian, I think he really has some identity struggles. I don't think he knows who he is. I think that's why he has to, you know, jack Josh's thesis idea and why he does latch on to being a nice guy. And you know, I mean, I think that he really is struggling with his own stuff, and he doesn't know that.
Immature was a word that was thrown in a while back, and I really agree with that. He's very immature.
Yes.
And I guess one thing I want to make sure to say is that he does get sexually assaulted in this movie. I know it's kind of the gray version of it where he seems compliant with it. Like he's kissing, he's on top, like all that stuff, but he's under the influence. It's he's not being consented to being touched by these other women. Like, so I guess why I'm bringing this up is we're not going to really talk about that. And I want it to be known that just because he sucks doesn't mean that this should have happened to him. So I guess I just wanted to say that out loud.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Well, and even I know that we haven't talked a lot about the drug use in this movie, but even Dani is not told what she's drinking before she dances. Me and Brittany were like, yeah, no, they tell her. And I'm like, no, they don't tell her.
They're not clear about what it is.
They're very vague about it. They're very time anyone asks what anything is, they're like, oh, it's a tea.
Like, to
I know
help you
that.
feel good.
Yeah, it lowers your inhibitions or whatever. Yeah.
So I guess before this kind of is a good segue into talking about the next topic, which is kind of the psychology of cults and kind of the tactics they use in this movie. But before that, is there anything else we want to say about Christian that we haven't said yet?
I think I just want to make it clear, too, that somebody who struggles with narcissistic personality disorder has also clearly had some things happen to them along the way where this has become a part of how they present to the world. So even though he is so disgusting in this movie, his character also is clearly someone who has been through things and that this is the way that he has dealt with it.
Right.
So I think,
and also anyone with, I think personality disorders get dogged on a lot. People like to talk about them like villains and like they're not real people. And the way I try to think of it is like he's losing too. Like his lack of empathy is keeping him from other people, from real relationships. Like no one in his life really knows him, and nor does he know them. And that's a really lonely existence. That might be what we're seeing on screen, because when he's also tripping, he is not having a good time. Like he's like rubbing his legs and rubbing his head, and like he's not having fun. And so who knows what inner demons are also going on for him that we're not seeing because he's not the protagonist of this movie.
Yeah.
Which doesn't, make his behavior okay.
No.
And he can still be a sad person on his own right.
Yeah.
So
You're allowed to be sad. You're just not allowed to emotionally abuse people, okay?
Yeah,
Christian Mundo.
That's not okay. Not okay.
Yeah. So we'll take another break here before we jump into cults. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Break. Ben, this is a break. Put a commercial here. All right. And we're going to be back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Cults. You love them, you know them, you're part of one. What about cults do we want to talk about today?
Welcome. We did indoctrinate all of our listeners into cults when we did our cult episode.
We did.
Hell yeah.
Mom's the cult leader.
I love it.
Somebody had to do it. I stepped up.
I guess. Yeah.
I was the older one, so it fell on me.
Already.
Well, I think like I'll say right off the bat that I only really know cult stuff because of like true crime and just like general sort of pop culture interest in cults. I've listened to some things here and there about like the psychology of cults and how people get into cults and that kind of thing. But I do know, Bonnie and Anna, that you guys have had like some episodes on cults yourself. Not that that means you're an expert, but I'm happy to defer like anything you might have picked up from doing that research that you saw in this movie as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting how they target Dani. I mean, from the get-go, like I think Pele targets her at first, but then I think
zooms in.
He locks in hard. But then the whole cult does. Like as I was reading about the movie later, someone mentioned, and I didn't notice this when we were watching it, even the second time, that when they all get there and they're all like being greeted, the guy who is greeting them is saying like, welcome to all the men. And then to Dani, he says, welcome home, and hugs her.
Oh,
yeah.
You did, Anna. When we watched it, you said, why did he only hug her?
Oh, he hugged her. Yeah.
Why did he
notice
only
the
hug
welcome home?
Yeah. The welcome home. No.
Yeah. But he did only hug her. And you were kind of like, well, maybe it's because she's a girl.
Yeah.
And that kind of tracked. But yeah, I mean, I think from the get-go, they are treating her with such compassion and such warmth, and that's a thing called love bombing that cults use a lot, where you just shower on this like almost oppressive niceness, and then you just feel so welcomed and you feel so warm that it is hard to rebel against that. It's hard to think these guys might be the bad guys.
And we know because they also say to Pele when he shows up, you're such a good judge of character or something like that.
He said you're so good at you're so good at finding people,
sensing people or something like that.
He says something like that right as
you have a good sense of people.
Good sense of people as he walks up, as what I believe is one of the leader type people, walks up to him. That's what the first thing he says. Pele, you have such a good sense of people. And I'm just like, oh no, I didn't see that the first time I saw this movie. I did not hear him say that like that.
So my assumption is he probably phoned home beforehand and was like, so I'm bringing these 3 dudes. They suck. They can be sacrificed. But this girl, I think we can bring her into the fold. There's a theory on the internet that they're behind her parents and her sister's death.
I was going to bring that up earlier. We were talking about the how hard it would have been for her sister to set that up. That some people have theorized that the cult set it up instead. But
oh boy,
yeah,
I don't know. I think it more could have been that Pele was like, oh, okay, like she's a good choice now because she's an orphan. She's totally ostracized.
Yeah. The family thing is weaponized against her so hard.
And I think that's the most important point about cults is the family thing. And I mean, you kind of look at it and see it even in gang situations where people join gangs because they don't have that attachment to family, or they're not getting that. But in a cult, that's very significant, right. And they play on that, and they break. If you do happen to have any bonds with family left, they cut those major things to break any kind of connection you have.
Right.
But she's a perfect candidate because she has no connection. She probably had stressed connection even when they were alive. And now that they're gone, she's a perfect candidate for this. Mm-hmm. And the scene where they're in the bunkhouse or whatever, and Pele is talking to her very intensely and holding her hand, and that's a real moment of recruitment, I think. Mm-hmm. This is your family. You are with family now. We are your family, over and over again.
We could be this for you.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and he's even like you kind of said, like relating it back to his own stuff. He's like, I never had a chance to feel lost, or whatever he said, like lost or lonely, because I had this community, this family, and just very much playing into like, you need somewhere to feel accepted, and this is it. Mm-hmm. And that's true. She does feel that. She feels accepted. She feels that warmth. She feels that connectivity. I mean, that scene where they're all, letting those emotions out with her. I mean, I think that's the most connected we've seen her the entire movie.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Like just the validation of someone letting you just be a mess, like letting you just be as messy as you need to be, like full snot, wailing, screaming, like something that we don't accept societally, like someone just literally wrapping their arms around you,
losing it, and it's being okay to lose it.
She had a great wail too, didn't she?
She's such a good crier.
Yeah.
Like even the way that she holds her breath before she cries, like that's such a real feeling of like before you scream cry.
Well, and that I've seen that's in the other Ari Aster movie Hereditary, where that's how they show the grief of I'm sorry who said Hereditary, and Brittany had like a PTSD flashback, I think. Mm-hmm. But like the that just like primal wail of grief, and just how raw that is. Like that scene where Christian's like holding her after, and it's just she's wailing. It's so visceral and so real. Mm-hmm. It's a really impressive portrayal of that, I think.
And I think too, kind of going back to that conversation Pele has with her in the bunkhouse, is he also, I think what makes it feel not nefarious is because up to this point, Christian has sucked. No one's taking care of her. So you're like on his side with this conversation. But if you look at it from a more nefarious cult mentality, is he's also trying to distance her from Christian. He is trying to weaken their relationship by pointing out where he's bad for her. And even though he is correct, it is also a tactic.
Right. That's a very good point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like, and I know that we're not talking about this, but I'm just going to mention it very briefly. I always do this kind of shit when we talk about stuff. She gets worried that Christian is going to see them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that very much is the response of someone who is being abused in a relationship.
Because they weren't doing anything. They were sitting there.
They were sitting next to each other.
And yes, I think he held her hand at that point. Her hand, but even then, okay. You can hold someone's hand. It's like not anything terrible. But yeah, she gets very worried that he's going to come in and see them.
Yeah, which is interesting. Anyway, back to the cult stuff.
I think the only thing that I would want to add about the cult stuff is that idea, say the word again, Anna, individualization.
De-individuation.
When you lose your own individuality.
Yes.
And any values, any morals that you have yourself are so subdued, if not completely lost. And that's why we can see these members of this cult all standing there watching this suicide and not really having any affect except when they needed to have affect as a whole. as an assimilated whole when the man was suffering.
Right.
And then they felt emotion together as his pain or whatever, but they weren't at all. No one was shocked. No one was offended. No one had anything that they wanted to say about anything,
right?
Because they had no longer any individual value system. It was only that of the cult.
And it's also their belief system. Cause when, Pele was telling, I mean, this movie, what's so funny about this cult is they're telling you who they are the whole time.
Oh, yeah.
Like Haley says, this is our life cycle. And she says, what happens in 72? And he does that thing across his throat, like you die. So they're never.
And everyone's just like, funny joke, Haley. And they don't ask any further questions.
And he tells Josh.
Like, no, really, what happened?
Yeah, and he tells Josh what the ritual is, and Josh knows what it is. Like, they're never really hiding what they're doing, just not super overt about what, you know what I mean? Like, they're just not like, no, you don't get it. Look at me. People are going to die tomorrow.
Exactly.
And I think, like what you were saying about the individuality, like over the course of the movie, they are slowly indoctrinating Dani into their rituals, into their community. For the May Queen thing, that's a really good way of, now she's dressing like them. She's taking, we mentioned here and there, but the use of hallucinogens throughout the movie to kind of get you off of your back feet because she's not, then her whole faculty isn't there.
Right.
So she can't really like assert herself.
Right.
Well, I would say just the whole idea of consent in general, whether it's to behavior or to ritual or whatever it might be, is gone. Like, she doesn't have the capability to give consent in that state in any manner.
Yeah, well, because she got the hallucinogens in her system, but also they've just totally broken her, like, as a person. Like, that part.
And she wasn't really strong to begin with.
Well, and that's how they were able to break her. And that's another thing that cults look for. Cults look for the vulnerable to prey on. I mean, they weren't going to, try to assimilate someone who had a stronger, I don't want to say it's like stronger sense of character, but I mean, she is kind of established as, kind of wishy-washy just because of, I think, the shit other people have put her through, quite honestly. But I mean, I think that like by the end, when she is like choosing the last ritual, when she's in that like flower get up, I mean, she's just totally weighed down by that.
There's nothing left of her.
Yeah.
There's not. She's been completely assimilated.
Yeah.
And also, I wonder, she looks like shit. I wonder if she's like coming down from the drugs. Like, she looks like she maybe hasn't been sleeping. Like, they're definitely doing all of, I think when you think more about like torture tactics, like keeping someone awake, putting them
brainwashing,
brainwashing, like giving them drugs, like also like being silly, like doing these dances, like making her dizzy, all this stuff, like constantly like moving her around. When they went to go bury all that meat and stuff, like they're
putting her on that platform and carrying her around.
And no one really speaks her language, kind of like they're using language she doesn't understand. And then also allowing her to see her boyfriend having sex with someone else. Like, they don't really, like, they say, oh, that's not for you, in a way that makes her suspicious.
Right.
So obviously more curious. And then they just let her go look.
Right. Yeah. That was all very frustrated.
And it's also a really good way to continue to put that wedge to set her up to make that decision as well. And I said to Brittany, do you think they do that with all the May Queens? Do you think that they like that them having a relationship is a part of how to get to the next step of what's going to happen? And maybe it isn't, and it might not be, but that it certainly worked in this scenario.
Well, and then it also, which is something that abusers do, which I think also happens in cults, which is they make you part of the bad stuff they're doing. So then you feel like you can't leave because now you're like an accessory. So she now probably feels like an accessory to murder. There's a really good movie called Martha, Mary, May, Marlene. Those four names in some order, with Elizabeth Olsen and Sarah Paulson and Hugh Dancy from like 10 or so years ago, where she plays a cult member who runs away and then goes to her sister and stays with her sister, and it flashes back to the cult. And part of the way that she was indoctrinated, this is a hardcore thing for me to talk about, is basically the cult leader rapes the new women, and so then she becomes part of that ritual of like bringing a new girl in for them to be assaulted. And so it also makes you complicit in behavior so that you feel like you can't leave. And so I would imagine once Dani kind of like sobers up, if she ever does sober up,
yeah,
she's like, I helped kill my boyfriend. I can't go back to America with 5 less people than when I showed up, when I left. And what am I going to tell people? What happened to them?
Yeah, she's pretty much stuck there now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
But if you take from that last scene when she smiles,
Yeah.
yes, she's okay with staying there. Is that a look of?
I think it's a I've gone crazy look.
I think, well, and then the other pieces, which I was listening to one of your call episodes before we started recording. And one of the other things is that they're isolated. She has no idea where they actually are physically. She doesn't speak the language of the country that she's currently in. All of the people that she has come there with have mysteriously disappeared. Like there's like her.
You have to hike to get there. Like, I don't think she wouldn't know how to leave.
No, exactly. She wouldn't know how to leave. And then going back to the part of experiencing trauma and the way that she's experienced it is also that the world isn't safe.
Yep.
The world isn't safe. What again, kind of like a perfect mindset for somebody to be in order to kind of be scooped up and brought into a place where we are safe and we'll be your family and we'll be everything for you and we'll feel all the feelings you have. I mean, like there couldn't be.
We'll kill for you.
Yeah, exactly. We'll protect you in any means necessary.
Oh, girl.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we want to slide into treatment, so in this portion, we pick a character from the movie and talk about what we would do if they were in our office. There's a lot of characters in this movie, but I don't know if there's a lot we'd want to pick from. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll pick on you. I'll pick on you, Hannah, if you want us to go first.
What you guys? Okay.
That's right.
Well, what I was actually thinking, as you, our listeners know, I just makeup treatment stuff. What I was really thinking about actually is not necessarily talking about doing treatment in any way, but more of this idea that is continuously perpetuated about women who are in abusive relationships. The idea that they don't want to leave or that they could if they wanted to, or any of that horse shit that people want you to believe is 100% not true. It's not true in any way, shape, or form. There isn't when someone is fucking with your reality on a regular fucking basis and making you feel like the smallest version of yourself, you don't have the capacity in those moments to say, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to be with this person. They make me feel terrible. There is not
feel terrible. They are creating what you are perceiving as your only safe place.
Exactly.
That's part of the breaking down.
Yes, exactly. And this idea of, and any idea that women stay for, I don't even know, whatever fucking made up reason that people seem to think they know something when they don't know a fucking thing about anything.
The question always is, why did you stay? Yeah, why did you stay? Why didn't you leave?
Yeah. And versus the idea that this person created a scenario with which I could only survive the rest of my life living with them. How could I leave?
Right.
When they so perfectly manipulated my sense of reality, my sense of being a human being, how could I? That's just not a possibility. And so having some sense of empathy or sympathy, I don't even know what the fuck, but just in general, people who have been abused, whether it's childhood traumas or adult trauma, like in any way, shape, or form, it is harder because we can't trust reality.
Yeah.
So that idea, and what I would say is if I had, so two things. One, let's say they didn't go to Sweden. We're just going to say that right off the bat. They don't go to Sweden. And I'm seeing Dani and Christian because of what happened with her family. Let's just say that they got told that they should see a couples therapist for whatever reason. A couple of things. One, as I've talked about before, I do individual assessments and I see the couple together as well before I decide to work with them. And part of the reason for that is, one, there's a couple things I'm looking for. One of them is this an abusive situation? Because if it is, part of being a couples therapist is that I don't take sides.
Yeah.
That's the whole fucking deal. If I'm going to take a side, I'm not doing couples therapy, right? I can never be aligned with someone who is abusing someone else.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we're looking for some of that context. Sometimes that's why I ask questions about physical abuse. I ask questions about social abuse or emotional abuse. I ask them about their sex life. I ask them a lot of different kind of more subtle questions. And also the part of seeing them as a couple together in front of me is also seeing how they react to each other. Is there a lot of thinking again about someone who's always trying to please the other person or trying to keep the other person in some kind of mood in some way, shape, or form. So if Dani and let's say Dani and Christian come in, I would not do therapy with them. Because two reasons. One, because of the immense trauma she just experienced, she is not in a place to do couples therapy.
Yeah, she needs her own stuff taken care of. Yeah.
Exactly. This is not a place where we can get into that. There are too many and more important things that she needs to manage for herself before she can be in a place to sit in a room and deal with what's going on in her relationship, which is something that she's maybe has never done. Mm-hmm. The other reason why I wouldn't do it is because some of the questions that I would ask her, I think would indicate that this is a relationship where there is some emotional abuse going on. And as a therapist, I have had to have these conversations before and had to say, are you okay? What can I do to help support you? I can't do couples therapy, but there are signs, there are some things that are going on, and not even saying like you shouldn't be with them, because that's not my choice to make.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But
that's
it's
hard.
But
because
because a part of me is screaming like, girl, you got to get the fuck out of here.
Girl, get out.
You better get the fuck out of here, because this shit is not going to go. It's not going to go the way you think it is, girl. No matter what he's telling you, it's not going to go the way you think it is. But saying like, it sounds like there's some emotional abuse. It sounds like this. And if you're looking to get support through that, I can offer you some of this. I can have you, there's some therapists that I know, like that's how that conversation would go. And it might be something where I never hear from either one of them ever again. And I would totally expect that. I've also had to have the conversation with the abuser about why I won't do therapy with them. Mm-hmm. And I usually get insulted pretty consistently when that happens.
I bet so.
Yeah.
I bet so.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I don't think Christian would have the balls to insult you. So he would probably just walk out.
Or he wouldn't show up. Or like he
wouldn't show up. Yeah. That's
he'd
right.
like make up excuses.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because I think when I decided to do that, I did that individually. I did not do that as a couple. I do it individually and say, look, like you guys are not appropriate for services at this time. This is what I suggest. So that's my treatment spiel for today.
Okay. Bonnie and or Anna, if you want to take it.
I mean, I think obviously the one that you would want to pick is Dani, right? But I don't think I'll go too much into treatment. I do want to focus on one specific thing I would probably recommend for Dani for treatment, which would be group therapy. I think that just having some of that connectedness in like a healthy manner would be really, really beneficial for her. I think I would probably recommend she like try to expand her social circle in general. I think just finding, just connectedness in what would be a more positive therapeutic context would probably go a long way for her. But I mean, I think just there's going to be a lot of grief counseling. There's going to be a lot of trauma counseling. There's going to be, with that grief is going to come up a lot of probably anger at her family, anger at her sister. I think that would be really hard for her to deal with without being in therapy, without being in SIS. And I think a huge part of being in services with her would just be getting her to a place where she can express any of that. You know, Hannah, like you, Brittany, like you were talking about, just like being in the moment with her and saying, you know, this is okay to feel this, and we're going to feel this together, and we're going to do this, and this is valid for you to feel. I think that would be such a long process for her, just because it has been, I think, a lifelong thing of her learning this. So I think for her treatment, it would be a long form endeavor, I guess.
Yeah.
I would just dovetail on the back end of that, the idea that after a long, long time of that type of therapy that you're talking about, Anna, moving forward then and setting future goals, including just being more assertive and being able to share her feelings and know that it's okay to make a fuss and to be the center of attention sometimes, and to say what she wants and be honest about her feelings and all that would be the kind of the final stages, I would think, of working with Dani.
Right.
I'll just put in a quick plug for working with Christian.
Do it. How would you work with Christian?
I would kick it. No, I would
grab him by the shoulders,
shake him really hard. And then, first of all, I think a character like Christian would probably not come into therapy, because those kind of people don't usually come in by themselves. But like, you know, you were kind of setting up, Hannah, that idea of them coming in as a couple and saying, I can't have you as a couple. If you worked with him, you'd have to work with him on his communication skills and specifically on his empathy skills. If there was any way to help him improve himself as a person, it would be to work on his empathy.
Because I should mention that people even narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, those things can be treated. Like it's not just we say, oh, you're a narcissist, too bad, sucks for you. Yeah. But we can, empathy is something that can be trained, and you know, we can practice it. And so it's not we're ragging on this guy saying he's a hopeless case. I mean, he's dead now. Sorry, rip Christian. but if he hadn't gone to sleep, he wouldn't be a hopeless case. There are things you can do to treat that, basically.
Absolutely.
We like to say that there's hope for everybody. Yeah. Everybody has something, and there is hope for everybody, but they have to choose to go in that direction. So, yeah.
I would say just kind of continuing to piggyback with Dani. I know I'm thinking about, I listened to an episode, I think it was the Dr. Drew show, a million years ago. And he had someone on who had left a cult, and also a guy who used to be in a cult who is now a cult helps people who leave cults. It's he became a therapist or a psychologist. And she was saying how she got misdiagnosed with borderline when she left, because so many of the signifiers of borderline are also things that you struggle with when you leave a cult, which is lack of identity. You can't discern appropriately the emotional level of interactions you're in, because you're so unmoored the whole time you're there relationally. So it's you have too big of feelings or not enough feelings, and you read into stuff. And I thought that was so interesting, and I still think about that. And so I'm wondering with Dani, kind of going with that thought, is using dialectical behavioral therapy, which has a group component, like you've already talked about, which is I talked about wise mind earlier. That's a part of dialectical behavioral therapy. How do you honor both your emotion mind and your logic mind, so you're not shutting one part of you down? A lot of dialectical behavioral therapy is interpersonal effectiveness skills. So basically, how do you communicate to others how you're feeling and what you need in very concrete ways? If you guys are interested listening, you could look up Dear Man, DEAR space MAN. When I teach it to kids, I use Dear Woman. So it's just WO and it's a long acronym, but it's a step-by-step way to how do I tell somebody what's going on, how it's making me feel, what do I need around it, and how them helping me would also benefit them. So it's collaborative. And the woman part is just kind of how do you behave during that? I'm mindful of how I feel. I'm mindful of the environment that we're in. I'm going to use a sort of listening skills and speaking skills, like eye contact, tone of voice. So it's really trains you how to, one, honor and ground and manage your distress. There's two parts of it: distress tolerance skills, which she obviously needs, and
he needs that in spades. Yes.
So I think that which does have, when you do it more structurally does have the group component, I think would be really helpful for Dani. Just giving her skills to fall back on, because she's going to have to do this from the ground up. Like all the stuff that might be more intuitive to other people aren't going to be as intuitive to her, especially after this experience. So if we're even just, we're not even talking about the trauma piece to it. So if we're discarding the trauma and we're just thinking about how she like reconstructs herself after this experience from an interpersonal sense, I think that form of therapy would be really helpful for her, because there's also a talking component, but I think she really needs skills to help her help herself, and then also to communicate, because I think even if this hadn't happened to her, I think DBT would be good for her, because she's clearly not helping her using coping skills for her distress, and she's not asserting herself to those around her. So I think that it's a great, you can look up DBT workbooks and things like that if you're interested, if this sounds interesting. It's a really accessible form of therapy if you're interested in learning it, like even just like as a layperson, or, you know, bringing it into talk therapy. But that's what I would do with Dani as an approach with her once she's kind of done whatever trauma work she needs to do. So that could happen simultaneously. So we're going to move into final thoughts. So just kind of what we thought about this movie. Anna and Bonnie, if you wouldn't mind going first, because I think, is this the first time either of you have seen this movie?
I have seen this before. I watched it a little while ago, and I love it. I love this movie. I think the cinematography is amazing. It's so good. It's all very good. And I had to apologize a lot to Mom for making her watch it.
I'm not a horror movie type of gal. And so, but I agree with Anna that the visual, it was stunning. It was beautiful and powerful to make you think about. There were, besides the horror part, it was a little funny watching it together. And when it got to the sexual assault type theme, you know, that sex theme, Anna turns to me and says, "Oh, by the way, there's a really weird sex scene coming right now."
Oh, thanks for warning me.
Thanks.
I warned her about the gore. I was more worried about
the gore.
The gore was up front and
right there.
Right.
But I think that visceral component is needed. You know, I think that there are movies that just do gore for no reason. And I think the gore that was in this movie was very impactful and very intentional. And like, I think that's a mark of a good horror movie too, that it's not like gratuitous just for gratuity's sake. I mean, I think it's really intelligent as far as horror movies go. I really like this movie. I really do. I think the only part that's kind of hard is, I mean, obviously we empathize with Dani, but, Mom actually mentioned this at the end, like, who am I supposed to root for here? You know, and
for real.
It's a hard movie to know who to root for. And so I think that just makes it more interesting. What about you guys? Did you guys like it?
I can go. I love this movie. I saw it twice in 1 week, which I think is indicative of my mental health, that I saw it twice in 1 week in the theater. I don't think I've ever seen a movie that quickly, maybe Avengers Endgame, but I'm currently wearing a necklace of the triangle temple place in Midsommar. I have a Midsommar costume, the flower costume. I have a Midsommar sticker on my tablet right now. I think this movie aesthetically I find very pleasing. Like, it's like right up my alley with the florals and all that kind of stuff. And I think it does feel like a perfect movie in the tone of it and the visuals of it, how emotionally intelligent it is. I think Ari Aster, the director, is like quickly becoming one of my favorites because Hereditary as well. They're both horror movies, but what stayed with me longer was the emotional components of it and how it told us. Because I think what I love about horror is it lets you tell a true story within something high concept. And so I think that's what I love about this movie and Hereditary is people come for the horror and then they get fucked psychologically by what's actually going on, which I think is great. So I'm excited for anything else he makes. I think he has 2 movies in post-production, so I'm pretty excited about those. But yes, I love this movie. I think Florence Pugh is like one of my favorite actresses. I think she is a star. Like the way she can cry, like her whole guts are out. And I will probably watch this movie a ton more, even though the gore really grosses me out. Like I can't look at it. I have to look away. I've seen it enough times now where I know exactly when
You know when it's coming. Yeah. You can
but
kinda-
they do those jump cuts to the faces and I'm just like, like come on, bro. But yeah, so love this movie. We'll definitely watch again and again. Hannah?
I also really like this movie. I think it's I think the cinematography is just beautiful, and I think the music is great.
Oh, the score is amazing.
The tone is fantastic. Like even the artwork that shows us exactly what's going to happen in the movie. Also,
just laying out the entire plot. Amazing.
Yes. And so. Yeah, so I think it's a beautiful movie to watch. I'll definitely watch it more. And I think that Florence Pugh and also the actor who played Christian did a masterful job of portraying these characters in a really beautiful way. I mean, it definitely is a movie where it's hard to tell who to root for. I mean, I know at some parts I'm like, oh, maybe she should just be with Pele. Maybe he's like the guy for her. Like, and like that felt like a sane thing to say at the time. So it's just so, and every time I feel like I pick up something different. But even just, and it also feels like an experience. I know that sounds like really like a douchey thing to say, but it really feels. But it
feels
really
like art, bro. That's a douchey thing to say, but I feel like I'm watching art
with a capital F.
Yes, absolutely. So I love it. Definitely will watch it 1,000 more times. I also have a cosplay outfit. I dress up in the bear mostly because I like to dress up like a bear because it's cute. Truly, my bear does not look anything like his bear. I'm like in this little suit. I have little ears and bear slippers.
Someone's like, what movie are you from? And you're like, Midsommar. They're like, oh, that sounds cute. I'll watch it. You're just totally giving some false advertising.
Exactly.
It's just about this girl who goes on a summer vacation with her boyfriend. Their relationship's a little rocky.
And there's some really cute. It's all great.
And they go to Sweden.
It's like a Mayfair, like a Mayfair celebration.
Yeah, absolutely. I
mean, I think. I do think, I'm sure people are currently writing dissertations around why this movie is so, women particularly have really felt seen by this movie and what that means and how this movie does a good job, like you're saying, Hannah, of making you kind of go along with Dani, of being like, maybe this cult isn't that bad. Maybe like Pele could be her boyfriend. Maybe like good for her when she was at the very end. Good for her.
Like fuck Christian. He's a fucking asshole anyway. Fuck that guy. Well, and also just like in the way that it's presented, right, as the perfect answer to what she's experiencing. Truly,
is what a cult tries to be, like the answer.
Exactly. So,
well, all right. Well, thank you again, Bonnie and Anna, from coming on from Freudian Sips. Where can everybody find you?
You can find us on freudiansipspod.com, and then you can find us on socials at Freudian Sips Pod as well. So we're on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook mostly.
All right. And you can find them wherever, I'm assuming wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Freudian Slips. So give them a listen, give them a review. And also you can find us at Popcorn Psychology at Facebook, Instagram, TikTok now. I'm still figuring that out. You can also find us.
Really good at it in the world.
Yeah, I'm with like the young people. We're also on Twitter at popcorn_psych. You can always email us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com if you have any like recommendations that you would like us to know about. So thank you and have a hot girl midsummer.